So if you've taken painkillers, you shouldn't be in pain anymore. Vacuum the floor.
He stared at the painkiller package I had just taken.
Please wait a little for the medicine to work.
When I told him that, he sighed loudly and stood up. It's not like I was asking him to do the chores. He could have waited a bit. I was holding back my sigh, then a sharp pain shot through my back. As I fell to the floor, I saw my husband Stephen sitting indecently with one leg on the back of the sofa. I was shocked and wondered, did he just kick me? As he laughed coldly.
It's enough with the period pain excuses. Just vacuum the floor now.
My name is Mary, I'm 27 years old. I'm a typical housewife living with my husband, Stephen.
I met Stephen when I joined the company where he worked. After graduating from college, I took a job in sales.
He was my mentor there.
He was handsome with short hair, and his good looks and conversation skills attracted customers. In a sales job, successful individuals are those who possess extensive knowledge and information about the products they are selling, and can utilize these insights in their sales approach. Alternatively, it's said there's another type of successful salesperson who can make the customer feel compelled to sign a contract.
Stephen was definitely the latter.
Initially, I only had respect for him as a successful salesman. But when I was struggling to make deals, Stephen reached out to me. Gradually, I began confiding in him. While we were going out and having meals together, I developed feelings for him. Therefore, I was overjoyed when we started dating and ecstatic when he proposed. Our married life was filled with happiness. But there was one thing that always troubled me. The fact that I have suffered from severe menstrual pain since my school days. Initially, I used mild over-the-counter painkillers, but as my body got used to them, I needed stronger medication to get through my daily life. When we were dating, Stephen would adjust his plans according to my cycle and would comfort me when I complained about the pain. I thought this care would continue after marriage. But I was wrong. Every month, the same menstrual pain occurred.
Seeing me struggle to do housework without medication, Stephen would just sigh.
This didn't just start in the last few years, get used to it. We both work, but Stephen earns more and contributes a larger amount to our living expenses. My earnings wouldn't be enough for both of us, so I put extra effort into housework. During my period, I would finish as much housework as I could, while the painkillers were effective, then rest a bit on the sofa before resuming. I was doing everything in order, but to Stephen, it seemed like I was just lying down and resting. No matter how much I did, he never offered a word of comfort. Then one day we bought a new house. We had been living in an apartment, but we purchased a larger home in case we had children. Stephen's parents love socializing and often host parties with relatives. Stephen thought it was a perfect opportunity to show off our new house and decided to invite the relatives for a party at our place. Once he made up his mind, Stephen was quick to act. He set the date for the party and handed me a list of relatives who would be attending. The list included not only names but also ages and food preferences. To my surprise, Stephen made sure to prepare dishes that catered to everyone's preferences.
Make sure to prepare dishes that cater to everyone's preferences. I won't forgive any shortcuts like buying ready-made appetizers.
He said in an annoyed tone. It was challenging to plan the menu, as everyone had different likes and dislikes, and some favorite foods of one person were disliked by another. After days of sleepless nights for planning the menu, my period started behind than I expected. I took painkillers, finished cleaning the rooms, and decorated them with flowers the day before. I placed air fresheners and repeatedly went over the next day's party steps in my mind. Then that night, after preparing the menu, finally I went to bed. While I was preparing with the help of painkillers, Stephen had daily evening drinking and laughing loudly at the TV. I remembered Stephen like that, as I fell asleep in bed. The next morning, I got up before Stephen to make breakfast and started cooking for the party while tidying up. I was checking the time constantly and kept moving. I arranged the finished dishes on the table and carefully checked every area, from the entrance to the living room and the bathroom. But it seemed the effect of the painkillers was wearing off, as I could no longer bear the gradually intensifying pain, so I sat down on the sofa. I wanted to lie down, But since I had managed to do my hair and makeup nicely, and didn't know when the relatives would arrive, I decided to just sit. As I turned my gaze towards Stephen, he was watching TV, a glass of alcohol in hand. Despite the fact that relatives were about to arrive, I wanted to say, "Don't start drinking now," to Stephen, but the words wouldn't come out. Noticing my gaze, Stephen glared at me.
What, you're giving me that "don't drink at this time" look?
It's not that.
I'm getting nervous too. And you're just lounging on the sofa. You finished the preparations, right?
Stephen put his glass on the table and walked towards me. I felt a strange tension in his stare, a bad feeling growing inside me.
Everything is in order, but my period started and the painkiller's effect is wearing off, so I'm taking a short break. I'll get moving soon.
Stephen sighed and glared at me. Don't coddle yourself over a mere stomachache. My mom never did that.
Right after those words, just as I thought Stephen had come up behind me, I was suddenly kicked in my back and fell off the sofa to the floor. By the time I realized that I had been kicked by someone, I was already on the floor, and it took me a while to grasp what had happened.
Meanwhile, Stephen sat down on the sofa nonchalantly. And, unbelievably, he started playing games on his mobile phone.
I couldn't understand what was happening or the situation I was in. All I knew was that Stephen, without a single word of apology, was laughing and enjoying his game. When I tried to stand up, suddenly Stephen fell to the floor. Looking up to see why he fell, I saw Stephen's dad, Paul. He was standing behind the sofa.
Paul looked furious, and I couldn't take my eyes off him.
What's going on?
Stephen couldn't be understanding the situation and checked the sofa in panic.
Papa? Did you just push me?
While Stephen was picking up his phone from the floor, and he asked Paul,
I didn't push you, I shoved you, Stephen.
What? Why would Paul shove me?
You fools, what do you mean for kicking someone in the back? And that someone is your wife, Stephen.
Stephen seemed a bit taken aback by Paul's anger.
I was just a bit bold because I was drinking.
Stephen tried to respond, but Paul glared at him, his excuse not mitigating the situation.
Don't blame it on the alcohol. Whatever the reason, a man should never resort to violence against a woman.
What do you mean by reason? This is like discipline.
Discipline?
Yes, she was resting on the sofa, even though the preparations weren't finished. So I was teaching her that if you don't work, you don't have a rest. It's part of discipline. Right, Mary?
Suddenly asked by Stephen, I didn't know how to respond. I had properly finished the preparations and sat on the sofa just to rest a bit. Should I tell the truth because I did everything correctly? As I hesitated, Paul also turned his gaze towards me.
Mary, is what Stephen's saying true?
I couldn't find the words to reply. If I told the truth, Stephen might get scolded by Paul and spoil his mood, especially with relatives about to arrive. I didn't want to cause any trouble for the relatives who were coming to see our new house. I was about to agree with Stephen.
Mary, your silence is an answer, isn't it?
Eh? Confused by Paul's words, then I asked back,
If what Stephen said was true, Mary would have immediately agreed. But Mary is silent. That suggests that something or everything is not true what Stephen said.
I felt as if Paul had seen through everything. I opened my mouth to tell the truth.
The preparations are already done. It's just that I am feeling a bit unwell today.
What? It's just your period.
Stephen interrupted my words. Unable to say it directly in front of Paul, I tried to phrase it differently, but Stephen's lack in tact brought my tears from my eyes.
Saying you're unwell over a mere period. If the preparations are done, then say so. I thought Mary was just lazily sitting on the sofa again, not finishing the preparations.
Stephen's words were final. He didn't remember what I said earlier about almost finishing the preparations. He hadn't seen that I had been preparing since early morning, or rather since yesterday, doing all the work myself without his help. He wasn't aware that I had taken painkillers to manage. He had decided to host the party here on his own and didn't help with any other preparations or cooking. A sense of injustice began to grow inside me.
Listen to this. She's been complaining about severe menstrual pain since before we got married, but she still can't get used to the pain. Every month it's like this. My mom was never like this, right, Paul?
It seems I was right to come early to help Mary since you said you would entertain us as the inconsiderate host.
What? It's you.
Yes, it's you. You insisted on having the party here, but didn't cooperate with Mary in preparations. Had you worked together, you would have understood how hard she worked and how much she was suffering. Instead, you started drinking before guests arrived. The one who was lounging around was you, Stephen.
Stephen was clearly frightened by Paul's yelling.
I didn't want Stephen to end up regretting like I do.
I tried to educate you with that feeling.
Paul pulled a chair from the dining table, sat down, and sighed heavily. Patricia was like Mary, suffered from severe menstrual pain. Being a man, I had no knowledge about menstruation, and it wasn't an information-rich era like now. Plus, her mother used to say she was weak for not managing her condition, so I thought menstrual pain was just a lack of self-management. Paul spoke slowly, seemingly recalling the past. Back then, painkillers were weak. Patricia, a housewife living with in-laws, was forced to do all the chores, even during severe menstrual pain. Then Patricia collapsed. We rushed her to the hospital, and she was diagnosed with endometriosis, which shattered her dream of giving Stephen siblings.
Hey?
Stephen asked Paul in a small voice.
It varies by individual, and not everyone ends up like that. But excessive endurance of menstrual pain can lead to illness, and Patricia did become ill. She faced stress from housework, childcare, inconsiderate to parents' in-laws, and an unsupportive husband, eventually leading to infertility. We rushed her to the hospital, and she was diagnosed with endometriosis, which shattered her dream of giving Stephen siblings. I blamed the era, and also her mother, but it was all wrong. I should have understood for her. We can't experience their pain, so I should have listened and accepted her reality. But I didn't, and it was my fault, blindly agreeing with her mother. I regret not knowing and still do.
Patricia supported Paul's shoulder as he spoke in a somber tone. I could only eye contact to Patricia in acknowledgement, who wore a sad smile as she said sorry for intruding.
Hard to understand. Despite his busy work, he often helped with chores and even cut ties with his own parents.
Patricia looked at Paul lovingly.
It was the least I could do. I didn't want to burden Patricia anymore. I wanted us three to live happily, so I did what I had to. But cutting ties with parents is a big decision. I didn't want you to have to make such decisions, so I tried to show you my mistakes. But it seems none of it got through to you.
Unable to bear the tense atmosphere, Stevens spoke in an inappropriately cheerful voice.
Paul, you're exaggerating. In my memory, Mom was sick in bed, but I don't remember her being bedridden due to her period. Maybe you're just remembering it as worse than it was?
Patricia's hand on Paul's shoulder trembled slightly. Gently stroking her hand, Paul glared at Stephen.
You just forgot. Patricia didn't want to worry you and tried to hide it as much as possible. If pain were just a matter of willpower, it wouldn't lead to illness. But virtually, Patricia did suffer from menstrual pain and had to lie in bed. I remember you coming home from school and complaining about her always sleeping. I even talked to you about it, explaining it wasn't laziness, but a health issue. You didn't care, did you? Not only did you ignore Mary, but you also never saw Patricia's struggles.
Paul's words weighed heavily on Stephen, his shoulders visibly drooping. I didn't know what to say, or if it was even my place to speak in such an atmosphere. Then the doorbell rang. It was 5 minutes before the appointed time, and I hurried to answer the door, cradling my aching stomach. On the screen, relatives were visible. I quickly responded and rushed to the entrance. Opening the door, the relatives greeted us with a bouquet arranged for our new housewarming. I thanked them and led them into the living room with due respect. As the relatives entered the living room, the atmosphere was still tense between the parents-in-law and Stephen, causing the relatives to exchange glances.
What happened, Paul?
One of the relatives asked Paul,
Thank you all for coming to celebrate Stephen's new house. Sorry for the bad atmosphere. We were just arguing.
Does arguing usually mess up the sofa and cushions like this?
He misunderstood Mary resting on the sofa due to poor health as laziness and pushed her off. I was scolding him for that.
Hearing Paul's words, the relatives' expressions turned to disbelief, and a younger-looking woman came over to me.
Are you okay? You must be tired from all the preparations.
I shook my head in response.
No, just severe menstrual pain.
Just? What did you say? There's menstrual leave at work, you know? I've used it too. Everyone's pain varies, but when it's really bad, you can apply for it at work. Why can't you rest at home?
She said this and turned to Stephen with momentum.
What?
Stephen, taken aback, was met with cold stares from the parents-in-law and the relatives. Unable to bear the scrutiny, Stephen rushed into his room. Despite Stephen's absence, no one followed him. It seemed the relatives knew about Patricia's condition, and even the men showed understanding. The parents-in-law immediately came to me apologizing for their son's behavior, while the relatives admired the new house and praised my cooking. I think no one blamed me. They were impressed with the food and showered me with compliments. I began to enjoy myself as the painkillers started to work. After a while, I received an email from Stephen. It said that because of me, he couldn't enjoy the gathering at all. He wrote about being scolded by Paul and having no allies among the relatives, wondering why it all had to be him. I was annoyed he chose to email rather than call. As I contemplated how to respond, Patricia glanced at my phone, seeing the message, and she stood up. Paul was seeing that, then asked, "What's going on?" Patricia snatched the mobile phone from me and handed it to Paul. When Paul looked at the phone, he also stood up, just like Patricia had.
He still hasn't understood anything. It seems I need to take him home and re-educate him from the basics.
Although unexpected, Paul and Patricia said this, looking at each other. Later, the relatives also agreed with the idea of re-educating Stephen, and they seemed fully committed to it. After a while, sensing the atmosphere, the relatives tactfully left, and Patricia went to Stephen's room and dragging him out. Both Paul and Patricia took Stephen by the arm, and he was led away without a chance to protest. About a week later, Stephen was taken back to his parents' house. I received an email from Stephen. About a week later, Stephen was taken back to his parents' house. I received an email from him. According to it, he mentioned that Patricia was making him extensively study about the female body and the difficulties of menstrual pain. He was being made to do household chores under Paul's supervision, assuming Patricia was in pain. The email sounded like complaints about balancing work and housework. I laughed when reading it, thinking about how Paul and Patricia had said they would re-educate him from the basics, and it was really happening. I wondered if Stephen now understood a bit of my feelings, which made me smile. During this time, I took the opportunity to focus on my menstrual health. Following the relatives' advice that severe menstrual pain should be checked by a gynecologist, I visited the hospital while Stephen was away. Because of the advice on medication, daily routines and precautions was helpful. Life without Stephen's comments was surprisingly comfortable. I could live at my own pace and lie on the sofa when I felt tired. It felt like a life where I could take care of myself. I somewhat hoped for more time like this. Partly due to Patricia's intervention, I enjoyed this slow-paced life and didn't reply to Stephen's emails. A few weeks later, when Stephen returned with his parents,
the parents-in-law, who came straight to the dining table, made Stephen sit in a chair in front of them and pulled out a green paper from an envelope.
It turned out to be a divorce application. I thought, could this really be a divorce right here and now? But Stephen was filling in the necessary information with a pen. Stephen began filling it out, and when he finished, Paul spoke solemnly.
Mary, if Stephen ever behaves badly towards you again, feel free to submit this signed divorce application.
Paul's eyes were serious, and Stephen's too. During our separation, Stephen was apparently re-educated by his parents-in-law and promised to change his behavior. Since then, Stephen has kept his promise, not showing arrogance and even willingly doing housework, especially during my period. Gradually, he stopped making derogatory comments about menstruation. Our life has become more peaceful, and I am relieved. From now on, I plan to live without overexerting myself, paying attention to my health, and taking care of myself.